Good morning and welcome. We are going to be talking about how to beat burnout and have a balanced life with Molly Mackey, one of EFR's trainers. I'm going to turn it over to Molly and she's going to share all sorts of great information for you today. We do have a chat feature that you can use when Molly asks you to contribute to any questions she asks, or if you have any questions that you want to ask me, to kind of do during the Q&A, I can moderate that at the end. So Molly, take it away.
Good morning. Thank you for joining me this morning. Like she said, I'm Molly Mackey. I'm one of EFR's trainers. I do live in the metropolis of Jessup, Iowa, if any of you are familiar with that. So this is a short webinar. We've only got a half an hour together. So we're just going to highlight basically the highlights of burnout, the balanced life. I'll probably give you guys some exercises to think about going forward. If you do want a longer version of this, you can contact EFR. I know burnout is a huge issue. So I work with folks all over in healthcare, human services, nonprofits, a bunch of different industries, and we're seeing it really impact a lot of different folks. And we've seen a lot of turnover because of it. So hopefully we'll give you some different tools, some things to think about that can be helpful today. All right, so what are we going over? We're going to cover the definition of burnout from the World Health Organization. Burnout has a very specific definition. Why does it matter? So what effects are we seeing on an individual level and also on a population level? We're going to look at the causes of burnout. And from that, we can also see how do we prevent burnout? How do we help with some of those coping skills? And then we're going to briefly go into the 8 dimensions of wellness. Again, because we have a short amount of time today, we don't have time to do a deep dive into those, but I do want you consciously thinking of where am I at in each of those dimensions? A lot of people talk about work-life balance, like there's only 2 things in life, when actually, if we back up and take a conscious look, there's 8 different dimensions of wellness. And I also want you to think about, is there one small thing that I can do going forward that's going to make a big difference in my life? So the overall definition of burnout, again, this is from the World Health Organization, is a syndrome that's basically from chronic stress that hasn't been managed. So it has 3 different dimensions, and we're going to go through the difference. There's a difference between regular stress and burnout, and we'll go through what that is and what that looks like. So the 3 different dimensions of burnout are basically people are just exhausted. There's that fatigue. You wake up, you don't want to go to work, you're tired, you don't want to get out of bed. There's also an increased mental distance from your job. There's people being negative, there's cynicism. Sometimes this shows up, especially in helping professions, as compassion fatigue, like you're trying to care and there's no more left. There's no more left to give. And it always reduces professional efficiency and effectiveness. So once you're burnt out, you're to the point where it's negatively impacting your job, which is different than stress. So when we look at stress, stress is generally short term. A lot of times it's situationally based. We can look at a project deadline, organizational changes. Think about when you were in college and you crammed for a test, right? There's short spikes and then it comes back down. Now, the interesting thing about stress and how it's very different than burnout is stress can either positively or negatively impact performance. Now, there was a researcher from Stanford, and she wanted to see, how does stress actually impact performance? So she put people in 2 different groups. The first group, she said, look, we're going to put you through some stressful activities. And after that, we're going to give you a bunch of different cognitive tests. And we know that stress negatively impacts performance. The second group, they said, look, we're going to put you through stressful activities, but you know what? Stress releases a lot of different good hormones. It gets your brain thinking. Stress positively impacts performance. And what was interesting and what they saw was that it was self-fulfilling. So the folks that believed that stress would negatively impact performance, it did. The folks that believed that it would positively impact performance, it did. So it wasn't the stress, it was what people believed about the stress. So if we have short-term bouts of stress, it can help with motivation, it can help with focus, it can be a good thing. Where stress dovetails into burnout is if we keep that chronic level of stress and it never goes down, that's when we get into burnout territory. Burnout takes place over a long period of time. It's chronic. There's no breaks. Even when we go home, we keep thinking about work or we keep thinking about those stressful situations. And burnout always negatively impacts performance. There's not a time where burnout is ever going to increase your professional efficiency or effectiveness. Some of the overall cost and stats of burnout, and these are some recent stats, is in 2023, 65% of workers, this was across all industries, said they'd suffered burnout. A more alarming stat was last year, 83% of frontline healthcare Gen Z workers said they were burnout. And we know we already have a shortage of folks in healthcare. All of us, no matter what industry we're in, are going to dovetail into healthcare, whether it's us going for care or one of our loved ones. So that's a very frightening stat. Overall, burnout cost the economy $500 billion and 120,000 deaths from workplace stress, right? All cause mortalities. We also know that if burnout isn't taken care of, it can lead to insomnia, other sleep disorders. It can also lead to anxiety and depression. Now, from a population standpoint, we know in the US, KFF did a study. In 2019, only 11% of the population was saying, hey, I've got symptoms of anxiety and depression. This spiked during the pandemic to 42%. And I would argue that's significantly underreported. Those are just the people that admitted it. What's scary is it spiked up. We have not seen it come back down as fast as it spiked up. We still have a population where about a third of folks say they experience anxiety or symptoms of anxiety on a regular basis. So anything that we can do for ourselves and for the workplace to prevent that can make a really big difference. So we won't go through this today, but we can, I believe EFR is going to send out some tools after this. We will send out a free burnout test for folks so you can kind of see where are you at, what is your score, what does that look like for you? And there's some of you on here going, I don't even need to take a test, I know I'm burnt out. But I just figure I always like to provide free tools anytime that we do webinars. So we talked about kind of the population cost of burnout. There's also a lot of individual costs. So again, that increased chronic stress, people will have lack of sleep. It can also go the other way. So we know if folks get into that burnout and it leads to depression, one of the signs of depression is sleep disturbances. For some folks, they can't sleep at all. For some folks, they're like, I just want to sleep 12 hours. I don't want to get out of bed. I'm exhausted. We also see an increased use, unhealthy use of substances, okay? Any type of substances, including alcohol. We see a decreased immune system. So people are more likely to get sick, get headaches, have high cholesterol, high blood pressure, all of that stuff, the physical morbidities and mortalities. And then again, it dovetails into that increase into depression and anxiety. A lot of times when people have the mental symptoms of stress, it can accumulate in the body. So for some people, it's tension headaches. For some people, it feels like a rock in their gut. For some people, they carry it in their neck and shoulders. I'd love to hear from you all in the chat when you guys are stressed or you're dealing with burnout. What are some of the physical symptoms that you have? So what are some of the physical symptoms of stress, of burnout that maybe you have, or maybe you've seen in other folks? What does that look like? And again, you can go ahead and put those in the chat. And my wonderful colleague is going to monitor the chat for me and read off some of the answers.
All right. Body feels heavy, feel nauseous, headache, irritability, mental exhaustion while being physically energized. That's an interesting one, and I can relate to that. It's a
Yeah.
strange dichotomy of wanting to do things because you have the physical energy, but not having that mental bandwidth. Stomach issues, neck and shoulder tension, really commonplace to carry stress. Headache, sleeplessness, racing heart. That's another common one, I think. So lots of people sharing headache. That I'm seeing that one come up over and over. The feeling of just kind of being sick, not myself. Weight gain, mental fatigue, increased symptoms of my medical diagnosis. So yeah, I think when people have those chronic health conditions, stress and burnout can increase the symptoms of whatever it is that's underlying. And then the last one I'll share is feeling overwhelmed and unable to handle the smallest of tasks.
Absolutely. Great. Thank you. Thank you for all the participation. That's wonderful. Someone mentioned, having the physical capability to do something, but not the mental capability. One of the things that I talk a lot about, whether it's emotional intelligence and self-awareness or, you know, building balanced boundaries, is a lot of times we talk about managing time when we really need to manage energy. And my husband will go back and forth on this with me because a lot of times I'll drive to different places for training. So, for example, a while back I was going to Rolla, Missouri once a month. It's about a 6 hour drive. So I drive there the day before, do a 6 hour training. And he's like, okay, well, if you get done at 3 with the all day training, you can drive back. You'll get here at 10. Time wise, physical wise, you should be able to do that. But after an entire day of lecturing for 6 hours, mentally I can't. I can drive 3 to 4 hours and I'm going to sleep. So I can definitely understand that. Somebody mentioned weight gain. So we know when people are stressed, it elevates a lot of different hormones, including cortisol. And we know that cortisol plays a role in folks gaining weight from stress. So, wonderful, thank you. So, what are some of the individual factors and environmental factors behind burnout? If folks have a lack of control or lack of agency, if you have a manager or coworkers that micromanage how you do your job, that can lead to burnout. We know that for folks to be happy and flourish in an environment, as leaders, we have to set the outcomes, right? The overall outcomes. What do we want actually done? And let them figure out how to get there, right? A lot of times, there are so many different ways to get there. It might not be how we would get there, but letting them have that journey, having that control can help prevent burnout. If we don't have clear expectations or if they're inconsistent, that is one thing that gets brought up that breaks trust, that leads to burnout. If one time you're fine with me doing this, or another coworker can get away with this and I can't, or there's favoritism, or hey, one time a report needs to be done in 24 hours and the next time you want it in 5 minutes, that can lead to burnout, right? People want to know what is expected of me. People want to be two things in their job, and that's confident and competent. And if we don't have those expectations set, it can lead to a lot of increased stress. If there are unhealthy conflicts within the workplace, now there's two different types of conflicts. We don't want to remove all conflict from the work setting. We want to remove unhealthy conflict. So if we have task conflict is, look, we're all looking for a solution. We all want the best for, the patient we're serving or the organization that we're serving or whoever our end client is. We're going to disagree on how to get there respectfully, and then we're going to find a solution together, right? That's healthy conflict. Unhealthy conflict is bullying, gossiping, backstabbing. I always look at the workplace like this. Look, you've got your stress that you're always going to have. In healthcare, it's patients, right? In retail, it's the customers you serve. That's stress that we can't do anything about, right? We can't control that. The stress that we can control within our organizations, are we tolerating that type of behavior, right? Leaders get what they role model and what they tolerate. And I work with a lot of different leaders that are like, well, I don't gossip. I'm a good role model, but you're tolerating it in your organization and you're not having those hard conversations to say that's enough. If you work in a helping profession, I would say even if you work in a people facing profession, I think about, airline stewardesses now. There's been a lot of different articles on how they've been bullied or yelled at, or even the folks that I work with that work at banks. Anybody that's people facing right now, we're seeing people have a lot shorter tempers, right? They want everything now. There's a lot less patience, and that can lead to increased stress. If there's an unbalanced workload, now a lot of times people think, okay, if it's burnout, it's too much work. It can also be too little. And I like to give the example years ago, I worked at Rockwell Collins and I was a forecaster. And the way the job worked is the first 2 weeks of the month, we were really busy because we were forecasting, we were changing numbers, all of that kind of stuff. The second 2 weeks of the month, nothing. I maybe answered 5 emails a day. Right? Nothing makes time go slower than too little work. But they couldn't get rid of us. They should have probably figured out how to maybe meld some different jobs in there. Luckily, I was going back to school. My boss let me do my schoolwork during that time, but it was stressful. If you're working long hours, right, you're putting in 12 to 16-hour days, all of these are factors that can lead to burnout. So I'm not going to ask you individually, but I want you to think in your mind, how many factors are you personally dealing with right now? How many factors are your team members dealing with right now? And are there ways to fix those? Right? Can we help give them agency? Can we help shore up those expectations and communicate those clearly? Right? Can we help balance their workload? What would that look like? What amount of training and support do they need? I was working with a group, I was doing a mental wellness training in Des Moines not too long ago. And one of the ladies had a really neat story. She said years ago, she worked for a supervisor, and that person sat everybody down and said, look, on a scale of 1 to 10, what is your ideal amount of stress at work? For some people, it's a 5. For some people, it's a 7 or 8. What does that look like for you? And so we'd have the conversation, and then why is that your number? And then every time they would do their one-on-ones, so they met every 2 weeks to every 30 days, he would just check in and say, okay, your ideal stress level you mentioned is here. Where are you at today? Where have you been at the past couple weeks or the past month? Because he was taking an honest effort to gauge where are they at and are there things that we could do to change it. So when we look at how do we mitigate some of the stress, part of it comes from balance boundaries. And that is, how do we look at boundaries for ourselves, boundaries for our organization that take into account the 8 different dimensions of wellness? And we'll look at those in just a minute here. I like this quote, balance is not better time management, but better boundary management. So where are we at with each of the dimensions and how do we keep those boundaries? So I will tell you, I've got 4 kids. They are 3, 6, 16, and 18. And my toddler has no trouble saying no. And my teenagers have no trouble saying no. Part of burnout is not saying no. So I'd love to hear from you in the chat. Why is it so hard to say no as an adult? What keeps you from saying no, even though sometimes you want to? What does that look like? If you could put that in the chat.
This is a great question. The first person to share says guilt. I can relate to that. You may be seen as not being a team player, not wanting to contribute, feeling guilty. I'm seeing that word come up several times. Someone saying, I want to ensure that I'm meeting my resident needs. I don't want to disappoint or let anyone down. I feel like if I don't do it, no one else will. Uh, Wanting to please others to the detriment of myself. Fear of conflict. Someone shares that they work in HR and they feel they need to be present when asked. No can be viewed as a negative reply or being negative. I feel like we are expected to be able to do it all, and not being able to do that would look like a failure. Wanting to prove yourself to managers. Your job performance may be perceived as negative. I have high standards. I don't feel like I have a choice. Lots of great and I would say relatable responses.
Absolutely. That guilt one's huge. Yeah. And sometimes I frame it as, okay, another way of saying yes to ourselves is saying no to others. Okay. So I would challenge you sometime in the next week to say no to something that you would usually say yes to. Okay. Maybe it's an outside activity, maybe it's an extra project. Okay. So I was challenging a group. I was working with the Iowa Community Action Association the other day, and we did a presentation on this. And one of the gals goes, "But can I tell my boss no? If you don't get fired, okay? I don't want anyone coming back and being like, but the webinar lady said I could say no, and then you get fired. Like, I don't want to be responsible for that. But it doesn't have to be huge. It can be little. Just say no to one thing that you usually say yes to, just for yourself. Maybe it's to give yourself an extra 5 minutes or an hour or something like that. But I would challenge you to do that. So, a lot of times we look at work-life balance. But work is a part of a balanced life, right? There's not just two different things that we have to juggle in life. And I've been thinking a lot about, do we have to balance that or do we have to blend it? I had a really lucky experience last week. So, and I'll put some context in it. For many years while I was growing up, my mom was a human resource executive, and every year she would go to the National SHRM Conference. And what was cool about that is she had the hotel paid for. So she would always fly myself and my grandma out to the conference. And we got to go to San Diego and DC and Chicago. And while she was going to her conference, my grandma and I would go around the city, right? One of our coolest memories was in DC, one of the larger organizations rented out a club. And not everybody can say they've gotten to go clubbing with their mom and their grandma. So this year I got invited to go out to speak in South Carolina. And I thought, you know what? It's right before school. It's the week of my birthday, which I usually don't work. Wouldn't it be cool if I got to do that with my girls too? So I took my 6-year-old and my 16-year-old. I still had to speak for 3 hours for the conference, but I was able to blend those. So I've been thinking a lot about, is it balancing it or are there ways to blend and intertwine some parts of our life? So here are the 8 different dimensions of wellness. So we have our emotional and mental aspect, we've got financial, we've got our intellectual wellness. So that's learning new things, trying new things. We've got our spiritual wellness. Now, that is not to be confused with religion. For some folks, religion is a part of that. For some folks, it's nature or yoga or communication with the universe. Very personal, looks very different for folks. We've got our occupational wellness. Again, that's just one part of the 8. We've got our physical wellness. We've got our environmental wellness. Now, there is a little plant in here. When a lot of people think of environmental wellness, they think of, okay, do I need to, plant some trees and hug them? No, environmental wellness is, do I have a pleasant, stimulating environment? This is at home, this is at work. Is it organized? Is it clean? Is it pleasant, right, for where I want to work? We also have our social wellness. Now, what was interesting is in 2023, the Surgeon General issued a warning. He had an entire report and it showed that loneliness, so if you don't have that social interaction, it's actually as bad for you as smoking 15 cigarettes a day when you look at all cause mortality and morbidity, which is really scary. Right? So what I want you to do is I want you to look at these 8 different dimensions. And I'm going to give you just a minute or so. I know we don't have that much time left, but I want you to consciously rate yourself from 1 to 5. Right? 1 is, oh man, I'm not doing good on that part of my life. I really need some work. 3 is kind of in between, right? 5 is, you know what, I'm killing it. I couldn't do any better. Right? And you can rate yourself any number in between. It doesn't have to be a whole number, but I'm just going to give you a minute or two. And I want you to number your paper 1 through 8, or just mentally rate yourself 1 through 5 on each of those. What does that look like? So one of the reasons I like to do this exercise with folks is a lot of times we're so busy running from this activity to that activity, this work thing to that work thing, that we don't break down the 8 different dimensions of wellness and consciously take a look and say, okay, where am I at versus where do I want to be? What does that look like? So this is one of my favorite quotes in business. Every system is perfectly designed to get the results it gets. So we set up systems, processes in business. When we look at that from a health standpoint, those are our habits. And there's a wonderful book, if you're looking for additional resources, called Atomic Habits by James Clear. And he breaks down, how do you set up a habit? How do you get started? How do you break a bad habit? And he talks about the little things that can make a big difference. Right? If you want to start reading, you start reading 2 pages at a time. You just start. If you want to start walking, you put your walking shoes by the door. You reward yourself with your favorite TV show afterwards. You don't start off and go, okay, I'm going to walk 10 miles. Maybe you walk 2 blocks. It's a great way to help set those habits. When we think about how do we prevent burnout? How do we get to where we want to be in each of those 8 dimensions? A lot of times people think, okay, I just got to add stuff to my plate, right? Self care is just one more thing that I have to do. I'm already exhausted. Now, if you look at your paper and you say, look, there's some places where I'm doing really good. You probably have habits that you want to continue, right? You may not need to add anything to those. For some, you may want to start a small habit. But I would argue that sometimes stopping something can be just as powerful, if not more powerful, than starting something. And I'll give an example of this. So I've got 4 kids, like I mentioned. After my last one, she was born during the holiday time. I craved sugar like I've never craved sugar in my life. It was a problem. Like I kept making homemade pans of fudge and then sticking them in the freezer, and it was compulsive. And I was not going to get where I wanted to be health wise unless I quit the fudge, right? Because if you put it with raspberries and a glass of orange juice, it's a full breakfast. Like it was a problem. I could add running, I could add smoothies, I could add salads, I could add everything. But unless I stopped the fudge, like it was not going to make a difference. So I would challenge you to think, okay, if I'm already burnt out and I'm already exhausted, is there something that I could stop doing that would make a big difference? Maybe it's I'm going to stop staying up scrolling social media. Maybe it's I'm going to, you know, stop watching TV, from 5 to 7. Whatever it is, it may be more powerful for you to stop doing something rather than add something when you're already burnt out. So I know we only have 2 minutes left, and I want to be conscious of folks' time. What I would challenge you to do is I want you to go back to these 8 different dimensions of wellness and set a specific goal for yourself. Again, it doesn't have to be add something, it can be take something away, but I want you to walk out with a specific action. Right? So one of the challenges is this week, I want you to say no to something that you usually say yes to. And the other one is there one small thing that you can tweak in any of these that's going to help you reduce your stress and reduce your burnout? So I know we have 1 more minute left. Thank you. I know, given all of your schedules, even a half an hour is a lot of time. Thank you for being here. If you would like a longer version of this, please reach out to EFR. We do a longer version where we really dive into those 8 dimensions. And I wish you happiness and wellness. Thank you for being here this morning.
Molly, if anyone has other questions for Molly, please drop it in the chat. There was one question that came through. Could you just repeat like what the environmental wellness or well-being dimension entails? Like what would be some examples of how someone could focus on that?
Yeah, so I'll give an example. I had a coworker, she had a very stressful job. And so one of the things she did is she painted her office bright yellow. She had like her favorite sayings and pictures of her loved ones. She made it a very pleasant environment. Everything was organized. And if you think about your home, maybe you have really good smelling scents in there and it's clean and just what you could play music, aromatherapy, whatever things that you can modify your environment so that it's pleasant and not stressing you out, right? Sometimes we look at our desk and there's a whole bunch of papers there. Can you get it to a point where you walk in and it's a peaceful environment rather than a stressful environment? Great question. Yeah.
Thank you. Would you be willing to show the last slide screen about boundaries? Request to go back a couple slides. Maybe this one. And we are recording this, and so it will be up on EFR's website later today. We do not share our slide decks with attendees, but we do share the recording on our website. Note the last, okay, we've got clarification on the boundary slide that we'd like to see again. The last one of the presentation, maybe it's the next one. Yeah, there we go. Be focused, be intent, and be creative. I do have a couple people saying that they're interested in the longer version of this. So that would be something that Molly could facilitate for your organization. And to coordinate that through Employee and Family Resources, you'd want to email, and I'll send this to all, it's our account managers email. And so accountmanagers@efr.org is a group email that goes to our account management team, and that team works with our clients, and so they can coordinate the details on that. Just lots of thank yous. I think everyone really loved this. I loved it. I loved your example about stopping the fudge. I think it's so relatable and it's fun and funny, and it's like a good thing to remember, because like you're right, you can do all of the right things, but if you still haven't focused on that one thing that's kind of getting in your way, no matter what that is, it's not going to work in the big picture. So thank you very much. For those of you still with us, you're joining us because you have Employee and Family Resources EAP benefits. Please visit efr.org, scroll through our website. I'm not sure if we have those slides on this, Molly, if you can advance. Was that last slide the last one of the slide deck, or do you have the slides about our benefits by any chance? There we go. Go back a couple. There we go. So you have all these benefits available to you and your household family members. You can call our 800-327-4692 number, and we do answer 24/7. So whether you want to call to enroll in a benefit, or you want to call to just talk through a moment in your life, you know, that's really kind of tripping you up. It could be a moment happening right now, or it could be something from the past or something you're anxious about for the future. Call us. We provide phone support. We also can set you up with things like counseling, life coaching, legal and financial consultation. So a lot of the things that may wear you out and burn you out are things that EFR can help with. And so I always like to remind people that we're one phone call away. It's very easy to access services. They are confidential. And EFR.org is a great resource as well. So go to our website, you can explore that, learn more information about these benefits. I am going to be sharing kind of a post-webinar, it's a post-webinar email that will come out in about 1 hour, and that will include a link to that assessment that Molly referenced earlier on in the presentation. So I'll extract that URL, Molly, and drop it in our post-webinar email so everyone has an opportunity to explore that a little bit more. But really appreciate everyone's time today. I'm going to check the question box one more time. I just want to read this because I think it's something that I love sharing a takeaway. Someone said, "Thank you for helping me realize I'm burned out, not just stressed out." So thank you. Thank you. I think a lot of people are probably feeling this too, especially as we wind down summer, and a lot of people are making a big life transition with their kids going back to school, or maybe their kids aren't going back to school and it's just a new time of life, being an empty nester, whatever that might be. I know the end of summer can be a big transitional period for people. So appreciate you, Molly. Don't forget to call EFR for everyone on the line, and make it a great day.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.